Welcome back, everybody on the call. Thank you so much for participating in our Water Center mini conference. We've successfully wrapped up session 1. We're about to kick off session 2. Hope you had a chance to quickly stretch your legs. Again, today's the day we were all going to be in Scottsbluff with the Panhandle Extension Center and the North Platte NRD for a nice day of learning about water and even a evening celebration at the Legacy of the Plains Museum. That'll have to wait. We look forward to be back there next year and celebrate a day like that in person. I'm Jesse Starita. Tricia Leadley from the Water Center is also here with me. And we're gonna go ahead and queue up talk 2, which is a great complement to the hydrogeology. This is more of a social science view about the Water for Agriculture project, which is partnering with Penn State, University of Nebraska, and several other institutions. And just maybe once again, for people who maybe have just joined, we are not using the seminar feature of Zoom. This is just Zoom Classic, if you will. So if you'd like to follow along when there's not a PowerPoint on the screen, you can click the speaker view in the upper right-hand corner, and that'll be a much easier way to follow along on this webinar. So Tricia, over to you for some speaker introductions.
Okay. All right. Well, we have a group of individuals who will be presenting during this time, and first will be Mark Burbach. He is an environmental scientist with the University of Nebraska-Lincoln School of Natural Resources. He is an award-winning scholar and currently teaches courses in leadership and human dimensions of natural resources. Mark will aid the group with extension programming related to many aspects of human dimensions of natural resources management with emphasis on agricultural water use. And after Mark, we will have Weston Eaton, who is an assistant research professor in the Agricultural Economics, Sociology, and Education Department at Penn State. His research investigates social and environmental outcomes of community and stakeholder engagement processes and roles played by citizens, stakeholders, experts, and expertise in energy and agricultural technology transitions. After Weston, we have Jessica Grosskopf. She is the Regional Extension Economist at the University of Nebraska Panhandle Research and Extension Center and the Director of the Nebraska Women in Agriculture Program. Jessica and her husband Andy farm corn and dry edible beans north of Scottsbluff, Nebraska. She loves to work with fellow farmers and farm families to address the challenges of growing food. Following Jessica, we will have Jason Farnsworth. He is a Headwaters Corporation principal and serves as the Executive Director of the Platte River Recovery Implementation Program. He is a biologist with experience on a variety of resource planning, management, and restoration projects. Much of his recent work has focused on restoration and management of braided rivers in semi-arid environments. And lastly, we will have Janeene Brown. She is the owner of Dynas Irrigation. She and her husband, Sean, have a small surface water irrigated farm and have a registered herd of full-blood Maine Anjou cattle. She is the president of Western Nebraska Agri-Women and enjoys learning about and helping to spread the truth about agriculture.
Thanks, Trish.
Yes, thank you, Trish. I'll jump on here and welcome everyone, and thank you for having us. It's a pleasure to speak about the Water for Ag project. As you saw there from the outline, Wes Eaton from Penn State is going to start off with an overview of our project and talk about a little bit of our experience in Pennsylvania there. Then I will talk about our experience with the Central Platte Local Leadership Team. Jessica Grosskopf will talk about the North Platte Local Leadership Team. Then we'll get a couple perspectives from local leadership team members. Jason Farnsworth was on the Central Platte Local Leadership Team, and Janeene Brown is with the North Platte Local Leadership Team. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Wes, and you kick us off a little bit of overview of our project, Wes.
Okay, thank you. Well, it's sure an honor to be here with such a diverse group and all the years of experience around water here in Nebraska and across the Great Plains and Midwest. Want to turn the discussion now to how do people work together to address some of these challenges. Arguably, the challenges we've been talking about thus far this morning and afternoon can be categorized as wicked water resource challenges. Nitrate pollution and contamination and other things that have creeped into the previous hour's discussions. What wicked problems share together is that they involve a diverse set of actors who are both causing and working to solve and address these issues. Also, as we got into the inklings of this between the relationship and nitrates and uranium, the science around these topics is emergent and unsettled and therefore susceptible to being politicized or used for different types of issues or perspectives and agendas. There's substantial resources that are needed to address these challenges. Consider Steve's comment about what it would take to fill the gaps in the irrigation system in Nebraska. It's incalculable. Also, it requires ultimately behavior change, individuals and different scales of collectivities. That sets us up for then what stakeholder engagement has been envisioned as a way to make some move in terms of improving management on these. The way in the Water for Ag project we think about or ask questions about and puzzle and study stakeholder engagement is it's envisioned again as this option where different diverse groups with different resources and perspectives that aren't currently connected or learning together can share, undergo social learning, different scales. They can coordinate their action and better leverage their resources. That's the promise of engagement. Two outcomes we can think of them. One is in terms of environmental performance, the efficacy of addressing the issue. Can we make strides forward there in terms of environmental outcomes? And then can we think about empowerment and inclusion and voice and better understanding and a more sense of responsibility or increased vision for one's efficacy or capacity to move forward and address these issues. So more of the normative and moral reasons. What Water for Ag is putting forward though is there's actually little empirical evidence on the effectiveness of engagement. That needs to be documented and cataloged and made sense of. So the way our project talks about it is we need a better science of engagement, a research agenda around that. And ultimately what happens in that black box when you bring different people together, how do those good outcomes come? And if they do, what are they? So the Water for Ag project then, this is a 5-year USDA NEFA funded, multidisciplinary, social scientists, practitioners, biophysical scientists, stakeholders, collaborative research and engagement project. And what we're trying to do is on the one hand, bring together community-led, what we call local leadership teams to identify the water and ag issues that are important and matter most to them and do some collaborative work on that. And then we support those teams with both biophysical and social science researchers and research. All the while, we want to study what's changing for individuals, what's changing for the group of these leadership teams, what's changing for the community within which they're working and beyond. And ultimately, is there evidence of a relationship between this social process, social outcomes, and the environmental outcomes at the end? Yeah, that's the task we've taken on with Water for Agriculture. Let me give an overview now of how we talk about and define engagement processes, what we mean by engagement. This is terms and jargon that's used quite a bit. So what do we mean by these things? So from the Water for Ag, our engagement definition is this, and we had an interesting time with our team just going through inquiry and query for our first year. And what do we mean by engagement? What are our assumptions about that? We put that now into practice with these few bullet points that we have here. What, for us, engagement is a community-led approach to decision making that withholds and puts forward these priorities: building relationships and trust. We want to bring to light and incorporate diverse views of multiple stakeholders. We want to co-create group knowledge and learning. That means we want to collectively produce the understanding that comes out of this group and provide opportunity for folks to have dialogue and engage to create what that is. That's novel because it's very different than starting a project with already deciding what the problem is and what the solution is going to be. We want that to emerge through the process. All the while, we want to proactively identify the issues. We want to develop those common frames, and we want to leverage and grow local resources to address those issues. So in practice then, what's our engagement process goals? When folks ask us, well, what are you doing with these groups? Well, these are the things our local facilitators, and I'll tell you more about the project sites in a minute, as will others after me, are trying to hold constant across our project sites. We want to prioritize fostering trust and building relationships, identifying who the key partners and programs are around the issues that come up as important. We want to assess what's the existing information and data that's already there and identifying where those collaboration opportunities are. We want to have this group work together to assess, well, how are we doing already with our current programs and what might need to change? Identify and prioritize critical issues, build capacity, develop a plan, evaluate, and prioritize what we're going to do next beyond the 5 years of this project. I just wanted to highlight that our focus here then is on the process over us as in terms of the facilitators of the Water for Ag leading these things, identifying what those outcomes should be, what environmental issue needs to be addressed, for instance. That our job is to hold these process things constant, to come to the end that group decides to come to. So how are we doing this? And these are the 3 states we're working in with diverse water issues. And there's 2 project sites in each of these states. And we're going to talk about Nebraska and Pennsylvania for the remainder of our talk. So let me give a brief snapshot of our project sites and some of the issues they're addressing. Jessica, Mark, and others are going to talk more about the North Platte and the Central Platte region. And I'm going to take a few minutes here to focus on what we're doing in northern and central Pennsylvania, Mifflin and Potter and Tioga counties. Okay, so to orient the issues around water and agriculture in Pennsylvania, to move from some of the quantity and groundwater and nitrate and some of the other issues we're going to be talking about in Nebraska, to water quality around the Chesapeake Bay. Farmers in Chesapeake Bay, and you can see the watershed here, will tell you or will be written about that they feel there's a target on their back, that they're the low-hanging fruit for agencies to blame for the non-point pollution that's still coming down into the Chesapeake Bay. So the broader puzzle, not the farmers own this puzzle, but the broader puzzle here is non-point source pollution and how to meet the Clean Water Act and the EPA's goals, which are now calculated into total maximum daily loads into the Chesapeake Bay, in particular the Susquehanna River as a major driver of those loads. Historically, in this area, there's a low degree of what farmers would feel as is their participation with agency-led planning. Again, contrast that with Nebraska, with the natural resource districts and farmers feeling a sense of voice on the board. Farmers in Pennsylvania would tell you they've been left out. Folks are making decisions without their involvement. So the puzzle here in Pennsylvania is, can community-led engagement that we're interested in exploring is, can community-led engagement provide a new means to meet that challenge? So let me give a little bit of context of what's going on in our 2 project sites. And then I want to give some bigger takeaways, that lessons learned thus far. And we're past the halfway project now, a halfway point in our project. I'll tell you more about that in a minute. So as I said, you've got these water quality challenges due to ag impairments across the region. This map here doesn't have Susquehanna River on it, but there's tributaries to the Susquehanna River that have ag impairments. that conservation districts and others have been working to address. And a key factor that's felt has been missing is the involvement of the small and medium-sized farms. So nothing new here. In particular, the plain sector, Amish communities. There's a famous picture of cows in the water. You're going to see a lot of cows in the water when you drive through Big Valley here in Mifflin County. So we brought together a group of professional and agency and farmer, large-scale and small-scale farmers, got them comfortable coming together and being together, and helped them by showing them interviews we did with stakeholders in the area, have them discuss what are the issues and challenges and what might they like to work on together if we can support them in it. You can see some of the issues that came up. They wanted some better information and education related to what was causing and what there was things that can be done about impairment locally. And the main stream going through here is called the Kish Creek. So an update on some activities that they've come to over the last year of meeting together. They've been partnering with the biophysical team as part of the Water for Ag project to study costs and impacts of double cropping, doing some modeling to make sense of what that might do. The narrative here in Mifflin County is, and this is of course nothing new to Nebraska as well, which is, yeah, I'm sure that works there, but does it work here and how can you show me? So doing research in a transparent fashion with stakeholder involvement is a goal to bring folks in to improve those outcomes. They want to produce a video series to highlight the area, and they want to work with the biophysical team. They're producing a fact sheet to then lead some education outputs. So just a couple snapshot there. And the quote here, farmers tend to be apprehensive, but it helps having the real modelers in the room. Talking about models in the Chesapeake Bay watershed, as I'm sure with aquifer issues in Nebraska are the same, it can be quite a sensitive or dicey topic to come in if you're wearing your expert hat. So instead, we brought modelers in to ask questions and do work with stakeholder involvement to enhance the utility of that for the stakeholders. Let me briefly introduce Potter and Tioga. This is, you can see here on the upper map, this is really the headwaters of 3 watersheds going into the Great Lakes, going into the Mississippi River and down to the Gulf of Mexico, as well as Chesapeake Bay. So it's a very, very special place. And the narrative here is one of defense as well. Local leaders and farmers will tell you, well, the water was clean here when it left, so don't be blaming us for your Chesapeake Bay problems downstream. So that's the current, or the attitude we wanted to, we were starting to tango with when we wanted to bring together farmers that felt they've been left out with agency and other folks. So the key kind of issues is establishing trust and confidence across the ags, agencies, publics, and the ag community, and leveraging existing strong community bonds and uncovering those and enhancing those, as well as local knowledge. The picture I chose to put here on the side, it doesn't show it as well as it does in real life, but the farmers there are farming on the side of mountains, which is adds all sorts of dynamics. Also the cold temperature. They feel it's a real special place, and it's going to need someone from the area who has local knowledge in order to work with them or gain their trust. It's also a very rural place, and there's some volunteers, but you know they may not be out of touch, so sustaining participation are some other issues. Current priorities, I want to highlight the bottom one here, which is we got a USGS grant where the farmers who at the beginning of the process had no interest in discussing water quality, did not trust the EPA data. The last thing they wanted to hear is someone else telling them Chesapeake Bay is going to come in and find them. They were the ones that, after a series of meetings, were the ones to say, hey, what is the water quality here anyway? And how do we know what it is? And how do we know what's causing it? And as soon as that narrative started to come from them, we offered to support and write this grant. And now we have farmers across the area collecting water sampling, as well as in-stream data loggers, and going to be building those reports and sharing it back with their community. So some takeaways from the PA sites. I mentioned earlier that we don't come in with what the problem is and say, here's what you all need to do to solve it. So if you allow people to come through their own dialogue and through their own sharing to what the problem and solution is, the idea is that would lead to building a sense of responsibility and seeing oneself in those outputs. However, try doing that in practice. Try bringing together a diverse group of professionals in agriculture and not telling them what they're there for. That is quite an interesting conundrum. And the other SELs, the facilitators that are on this session could tell you more about that. It's not just about building capacity through the process. We're learning that you need to build capacity in order for these stakeholders to participate in the first place. Also wanted to say something about the pandemic. What did we learn from that? Well, we had our years worth of in-person meetings before this. And now that we're on virtual meetings to the extent that we can, now that will work now that we've created these relationships. If we didn't have those relationships in place, I don't think that we would have had a whole another set of barriers to getting folks to participate virtually in terms of building trust. That trust comes through those personal interactions and demonstration of listening. Producer participation on leadership teams, we're seeing that this can address that sense of feeling left out by producers. They're seeing themselves included in multiple ways, and this relates to the research we're doing. One, those stakeholder interviews we did at the beginning of the process, they see their community voice represented in there, but also the value of the social and biophysical research that's going on. Something we can call a democratic approach, the fact that they have a say in what the research is doing. They got to share their perspective, and they're not just being studied themselves, but they're sharing their perspectives and seeing themselves as partners, as brought in their support around this. Okay, I'm going to wrap up my talk by a quick overview of what it means to do the social and biophysical research with this project. Importantly, the research we're doing here is two things going on at the same time. One, we're conducting sociological research and biophysical research to support these local leadership teams with their goals and perspectives that they want to accomplish. So we're responding to their questions and their information needs. We're helping guide and conduct research projects in partnership with the biophysical scientists and social scientists on the project that are responsive to their needs. We're also summarizing a lot of the data and findings that we get from interviews and bringing them back to the leadership team so they can get a good sense of what they're learning and where they may need to improve. At the same time, more from a traditional science perspective, we're designing and conducting research to examine our main research questions, whether and how and under what conditions stakeholder engagement actually leads, and there's evidence for positive social and environmental change. This next slide here, this is our conceptual framework from the socio-behavioral team of what we mean to study how and why and under what circumstances it could lead to change. We just want to say a few things about this, which is you start there and on the left is, and then to the right as we move through time, this are the categories or buckets of things we want to be asking questions about to understand, does social change happen and does it relate to environmental and behavioral change? So under phase one, what we're talking about is as we're bringing people together, they're not going to work in a vacuum. They're going to work in the history and the culture of that place that's already there. And that history and culture of participating or whatever those issues are in that place and how they've been tried before will have a really big impact on the success of bringing people together for another go at this and bringing other people that haven't been in the conversation in together. So those contextual conditions therefore impact the next thing, which is the process design. Process design refers specifically to the different opportunities that are afforded by the facilitators and by the groups coming together to enable everyone to have a voice in the conversation, to people to feel empowered that they were listened to, and for opportunities to share and learn together. In phase three, we can start to study some outputs or outcomes of this. Is there evidence that by learning together in a democratic fashion and providing resources, that learning happens and that capacity building happens? And if so, if you look on the far left here, do we see change for individuals? Do we see change for the group, for the broader community, and more higher up? The fourth phase is environmental and behavioral change. Okay, so people have learned and they change the way they think and talking about this. Do we see any actions? Does an individual adopt a new practice? Is there new resources being built? And then later in that fourth phase, does those behavior change, does that work with or connect with environmental change at local scales and community scales and broader? And then over what phase of time? So that gives us the metrics we're paying attention to in terms of the impact engagement is or isn't having. The last slide I want to show is just real quick snapshot. Well, how are you collecting data on this? And how are you doing your analysis? So this is this figure here goes through time, and time moves from left to the right. And the middle box is the actual engagement intervention, the engagement practice we're doing. So over here on the left, you can see we did these stakeholder interviews, which is qualitative research, before we helped form these leadership teams. Early on then, in forming the leadership teams, we conducted mail surveys in each of our project sites. And while groups have been meeting for 2 years, we've been interviewing the facilitators, having the participants take short surveys. We don't want to pry, we don't want to interrupt their process. So a moderate amount of data collection, and also been observing their meetings. And in the near future, we're going to be then doing another round of a mail survey to see what changed. We're going to do interviews with the stakeholder participants at the end to lead us to our results. So with that, I'm going to thank you, and I'm going to pass it off to some others on our team.
Okay, thank you. Let's see if I can get share my screen here. There we go. All right, hope you can all see that okay. Let me go back up to the start here. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about specifically the Central Platte local leadership team and some of the planning process, action planning process there, as well as some of the initial outcomes and lessons learned that Wes has kind of touched on a little bit already. So, and we have a huge team, but was specifically working in the Central Platte with me was Jason Weigel and Jody Delosier. So I'll make sure that recognize them. And then who is the Central Platte local leadership team? So we have Lyndon Boat, Jason Farnsworth, who's here on our conference today, and I hope we have time for question and answer from the public with our local leadership team members that are here, as well as Janeene. Bill Tadikin, Deb Van Meter, Chad Nabity, Jacob Fritton, Mark Ryman, Rob Schultz, Rich Walters, Tim Tunnell, Dave Zorn. And then early on, we had Andy Bishop, Laura Rohde, and Mike Drain. And as our topic, our process evolved and identification of topic came about, we had some transition with members of the local leadership team. So we've been at this, as mentioned, Wes talked about, in 18 months. We started in December or winter of 2019, and Wes mentioned we did a lot of interviews, and in the Central Platte, we interviewed 25 stakeholders. And then some of those we invited to participate on the local leadership team, although it's not comprised entirely of people that interviewed. And of course, the interview, one of these long interviews, purpose was to identify issues of community concern in the Central Platte. So we started with, again, when we had some, I think we had started 8 or 9 local leadership team members initially, and invited them to participate in this, as Wes talked about, this project that didn't have a specific purpose. Well, it had a purpose, but an outcome identified a pre-arranged. Well, we got to come up with an integrated management plan, or we've got to identify a plan for nitrates in there. So this was what's the topic, what's the issue that matters most to this community, and then talked about how we're going to do this and building relationships and things like that. As Wes talked about, we had our local leadership team members do periodic surveys. So in our attempt to learn what changed as an outcome or consequence of our local leadership team, we had a couple World Cafe discussions, leading the discussion on what are the topics that this local leadership team would like to use this time, and with our help to address and develop an action plan towards. So we had, I said, a couple conversations on that, but somewhat to our dismay, but given that we did all these interviews and the Central Platte local leadership team said, well, you know, these issues are being tackled by somebody, and the phrase that was used, we don't want to play in someone else's sandbox. Nitrate in groundwater, that's those agencies are tackling that. There's the issues related to integrated management plans, so agencies, those are other sandboxes. So we regrouped a little bit and so, okay, well, these aren't the ones you want to address. What do you want to work on? So we thankfully our local leadership team stuck with us, and we had some additional conversations, and it came up, well, what about Phragmites in the river? There's like, well, that's not really something that's a purview of any specific agency. So then it became, well, what about Phragmites do we want to tackle? We talked about education, policy, and other things. And then we had to realize that, well, we need to educate ourselves a little bit about Phragmites in the Central Platte. So this is where we had a little bit of a transition on our local leadership team and added some additional people that had some experience with Phragmites, and also had some people come visit our meetings to educate us a little bit in when I say us, I mean the local leadership team, as well as our project administrators, myself and others, about this. And so some of the things that occurred to the local leadership and why it made it interesting about dealing with a topic of Phragmites is it's not the responsibility of one agency. It's a hodgepodge of programs and agencies involved, and there isn't a consistent approach to management or funding. So this really started to resonate with our local leadership team as a topic. So we further refined the issue and became concerned with long-term management of invasive species, and more specifically, how do we fund the consistent long-term management? So we talked about and moved forward on an endowment to fund long-term management of invasive species. At this point, we decided to do that, we need to bring in the Nebraska Community Foundation, specifically Diane Wilson from the Nebraska Community Foundation. And she shared with us, what is the Community Foundation? What's an endowed fund? How does it work? And explained to us that we need to come up with a fund agreement and some operational guidelines to create this fund. And through the development of a fund agreement and operational guidelines, we further refined specifically what's the purpose of this endowed fund. And we realized that we need to actually broaden the management scope or the purpose of the endowment, not just from Phragmites, but actually towards conveyance. So with the conveyance of the river would be more impactful and more appealing to broader stakeholders and to potential donors. And this would not just deal with Phragmites, but flooding, habitat, stream flow, recreation, among other potential impacts. And then Wes mentioned in the middle, after about a year, we had COVID-19. But for us, again, because we had a lot of those relationships developed, we had a solid team, we had a committed team, and all on the same page, moving from face-to-face to a remote was pretty seamless. And then, so actually there is something now called the Platte River Resilience Fund. The Central Platte local leadership team has created with the Nebraska Community Foundation. There are two things that were necessary. There was creation of a fund advisory committee, which we have, and the initial $25,000 from the Platte Valley Weed Management Agency was shifted to the Community Foundation. So there is actually a Platte River Resilience Fund managed and offered through the Nebraska Community Foundation. Currently, the Platte River Resilience Fund is in the middle of action planning, identifying values, mission statement, and vision statement. There's been a subcommittee, a communication subcommittee has been created to develop a press release and one-page informational cheat sheets, if you will, describing the endowed fund, and elevator speech preparation to attract donors. And also team members are meeting with agencies that have historically funded conveyance and Phragmites issues in the Central Platte Valley, such as NRDs, making them aware of the fund and that perhaps they may want to shift funding or a portion of their funding to the fund in the future. And what is the purpose of the fund? You see here we have established as a component of the Nebraska Community Foundation to provide a means for a public-private partnership effort to develop a source of funds for long-term supportive activities that will ensure conveyance of water in the Platte River system in Nebraska. The initial focus on control of invasive species, but may include other actions necessary to support water conveyance. And its geographic focus is from Kingsley Dam and the South Platte River at the Colorado border downstream to Highway 81. That's the geographic area, but the Fund Advisory Committee recognizes that to deal with conveyance in the Central Platte and may entail working with upstream agencies and with the geographic location upstream. So may also activities may occur upstream of the Central Platte region. So some things that, so the Platte River, let me see, did I miss? Okay, so I talked about the advisory committee. There are 7 representatives, so with 7 votes. 8 of the members are local leadership team members, but we added for some more diversity and stakeholders, more interest, 3 additional people as representatives on the advisory committee, that being John Shadle from the Nebraska Public Power District, John Thorborn from Tri-Basin NRD, and Mike Morgan from the city of Kearney. And this is just a screen capture of the Nebraska Community Foundation and the Platte River Resilience Fund, just to demonstrate that does exist. You can go there and donate. And Tim Tunnell is the Fund Advisory Committee Chair. So what are some things that we've learned through this collaborative local community engagement? Wes talked about some of them, but again, be prepared for the unexpected. A vacuum wants to be filled. So we're coming with not a predetermined topic. We're not coming with, okay, stakeholders, are you interested in working on nitrates in the Central Platte or any other number of issues? So it took a little bit of a leap of faith on the part of local team members to come together in something that they may not have ever participated in such a endeavor before. It helps to have a topic issue with multiple benefits to a wide range of stakeholders. Framing matters. So again, it was important to frame this as a community issue, not an issue dominated by a particular group of stakeholders, but this is a community issue and a community-led issue, identification and tackled by the community. We've learned that experience matters. Most of our local leadership team members had experience with stakeholder engagement and with each other, and others were able to be brought up to speed fairly quickly. But it was, at least from our perspective, provided a relatively safe environment for those maybe who didn't have a lot of experience with stakeholder engagement to dip their toe in the water, so to speak. Again, Wes talked about it's important to take the time to build capacity and knowledge about the issue. Not everybody knew the same amount or in the same way about conveyance and Phragmites issues in the Platte River. And with the stakeholder engagement and community-led stakeholder engagement. Of course, relationships matter, and developing and taking the time for that was critical. And also, follow democratic principles with regard to every aspect of the engagement. This sounds like a no-brainer, particularly with regard to community-led, but even those of us on our end of things, on the academic end of things, it involves, shared process, shared power, and being able to share that and perhaps give up a little bit of control and kind of go with the flow, so to speak, as long as we're moving forward. And again, the stakeholders had a say in everything from setting the agenda to the conduct of meetings, of course, and then to the identification of the topic. So with that, I want to say thank you. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Jessica Grosskopf. There we go. Stop share. Sorry, Jessica. I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thanks, Mark. And unlike Mark and Wes, I'm actually just going to talk with you for a minute. First of all, I'd like to recognize my co-engagement zone leader, which is Cheryl Burkhart-Kriesel, and our entire engagement team. We actually have 14 stakeholders who are involved in the North Platte Valley. And we really had kind of an interesting dynamic as we worked through the process and starting the team. So there are kind of 3 points I want to talk about. First is forming a group. And for us, the North Platte region had a lot of attempted engagement and a lot of that was very, very successful. And so as we looked to reach out to this audience, I think the biggest challenge that they had was understanding why we were coming together. Like Mark and Wes alluded to, our biggest challenge was we wanted to bring them together, but we didn't really have a topic for them to address. We wanted them to work through that process. And for the North Platte, the question was, what's next? We have discussed groundwater issues rather extensively through the NRDs. We've discussed surface water to some extent, but the dynamics between groundwater and surface water are really, really different. And so there's several kind of managing bodies for surface water, and they're all managed slightly different from one another. So our group as a whole really struggled as we started to figure out the why. Why were we together? What were we doing? And so that was one of the challenges that we faced. Fortunately for the project, and unfortunately for about 107,000 acres in western Nebraska last summer, we did have the tunnel collapse issue. And I'm going to share just a couple of photographs with you here. From left to right, we have the initial hole in the ground. That was the indication that we had a problem with the Gearing-Fort Laramie tunnel. This tunnel actually lays in Wyoming. And again, it services 107,000 acres of farm ground in Wyoming and then into Nebraska. Just to give you an idea of how big that hole is, it's about 100 foot wide and approximately 50 foot deep in that first picture. The center picture is of the actual hole in the tunnel itself. And these tunnels that convey this water in this entire system was built in the early 1900s. This particular tunnel was built in 1917. It is a very large tunnel, and that's kind of the third photograph you have there. It's 14 foot in diameter and just under half a mile long. And so as we talk about the size and scope of this infrastructure, it's really important to understand how large they are, not only in their impact, but also in their size in general. So on July 17th of last year, this tunnel collapse essentially shut down water for what would ultimately be a total of about 6 weeks, and actually caused our local leadership team to really have a purpose. At this point, our team turned from, when we were dabbling in these ideas of we should do more education and provide more understanding to the public about water and water issues in our area, and it really turned the focus to, especially in the area of aging infrastructure. And so our team has been working both on education as well as on funding over the past year, specifically for this project, but for this tunnel collapse, but also for the larger discussion of aging infrastructure in our area. The third and final point that I would like to discuss with you is actually group dynamics, specifically to gender dynamics. As you heard in my introduction, I'm the director of the Nebraska Women in Agriculture program, and sometimes we have a hard time finding female voices in agriculture and in research. And so this was a really unique opportunity for us within our community to find those female voices. And in fact, we actually have 3 out of the 14 local leadership team members on our team are female, which is quite unique. And I hope that Janeene will share her experience in this process. But I think one of the things about our team is that there hasn't been much difference in how the male and the female local leadership team members have treated one another. And I think that's really unique, but it was exciting to have them volunteer to be a part of this process and continue to be engaged in the process. So that's one of the things that I'm really proud of as far as our local leadership team goes. So I'm not going to take too much more time. I hope that we're able to hear from our local leadership team members, because that's the most important part. So I'm going to yield the rest of my time for those local leadership team members.
Yeah, with that, we'll move on to Jason Farnsworth of Jersey, in the Central Platte local leadership team, and get some of his perspective with. So Jason, over to you.
All right, thank you, Mark. Appreciate it very much. Mark did a great job of talking through sort of the process that we went through, trying to figure out where we were going to go as a leadership team and where we ended up. So I don't want to sort of recover that ground. I think for me, it was an interesting experience. You know, I was happy to participate. I don't necessarily, I know a lot of folks, you know, that were on the team don't necessarily need more to do, more groups, more whatever to participate in. But, you know, I think specifically through Mark's past activities in relationship with the Water Leaders Academy and things like that, there was sort of a trust that had already been built to sort of bring folks into this process. So for that reason, I was happy to participate. It was interesting. I will tell you, is the first time I've ever been a subject in a social experiment. So, you know, you're sitting there as a group, wrestling with these ideas and trying to figure out where you want to go. And, you know, on the other side of the table, you have people facilitating this process, but are also sort of looking at group dynamics and things. So that was an interesting learning thing for me. You know, and I think, as Mark mentioned, and others, the challenge was that this leadership team was, to me, essentially a sort of a solution looking for a problem. You know, you get a bunch of smart people together in a room, and you, as Jessica said, you're trying to figure out what you're going to do, where you're going to go. In the Central Platte especially, there's a very well-defined sort of set of players that deal with a whole range of issues. And so there is a lot of unwillingness to step on toes, unwillingness to sort of take over territory. So, you know, this is my personal thought, but I think we were 1 or 2 meetings away from crashing and burning as a leadership team. You know, I could see people starting to drop off, starting to not show up just because we weren't coalescing around something. But at that moment, we coalesced around the idea of an endowment and the Resilience Fund. You know, that brought the focus. It gave me a reason to tell people to, you know, get back, everybody, come back together, and let's get going on this now that we have something that we can look forward to. And at that point, I'd say our process was sort of transformed into something that was very proactive and moved very quickly. And I think, Mark, one of your statements was like, holy cow, all of a sudden now we have an endowment and it's, you know, it's up and running and we're doing things. And which was sort of surprising to me, the speed that it moved on at. And I think my last thought was that one of the, if I look at this from sort of a social experiment perspective, I think one of the challenges may be that we had this leadership team that finally focused around an idea, a concept. And at that point, I think there was a need to start pivoting and getting other people involved. And so I could see the folks that were on the university side of this trying to figure out how to navigate that and keep this core leadership group together, but also bring in these new players. And so I think you all did a very good job with that, but it'll be interesting out the back end to sort of see, you know, as you go through surveys and things, how these people that were brought in 3/4 of the way through the process feel about it. So those are my thoughts.
Great, Jason. I really appreciate that. And I hope we have some time after Janeene to have some questions from the audience for you. And so with that, we're going to turn it over to Janeene, and appreciate Janeene being here. And go ahead, Janeene.
All right, thank you for having me. When I was first asked to participate in the survey, I guess that was 3 years ago, it made me think about what they were asking as a producer, as someone who works in the water industry, what things that were not, really made me think. Like, those are things I hadn't thought about, and I really felt like I should have thought about them. So then fast forward a few months, when I was asked to be part of the leadership team, I was really excited because something about that survey intrigued me. I was excited to be able to participate with other leaders in our community that had more knowledge than I about water, and be able to learn from them, as well as share my own experiences as an irrigator and a pivot sales dealer here in the area. So, you know, I was really, really excited. I wanted to learn more. And then when we first started meeting, I thought, holy cow, what did I sign myself up for? Because, you know, it became really apparent to me that there were a lot of varying interests that were in this group. And maybe not all of us felt like our interests had something to do with each other. And so it was really interesting to participate in the conversation, to work through those priorities and really get a feel for how other people's priorities still impacted us directly, and how we can work together on that. So, excuse me. So once we kind of figured out, I think we struggled the same thing. We were the solution looking for a problem, and that was really, really hard for us to take a step back, because we did have so many people already involved in programs that were addressing issues, and we also didn't want to step on people's toes. But it became really apparent to us that the why and the connecting piece for us was the education. All of us felt very, very strongly that there's a missing link of everyone thinking it's not my problem, or that it is someone else's problem, or other people don't understand. And so once we came together on that idea, it was really fun to see. I mean, we were ready to have a traveling roadshow that educate people about surface water, groundwater, irrigation, municipality, water use, and how all of those connected. And it was fun to see that excitement from even people who maybe at the beginning they were the frowners of the group. They never really got excited about things, and you saw excitement in them. And I think that was the point that as a team we really connected, and we really started making some progress. And then unfortunately the canal breach happened last year. And when that happened, I think it was a little bit of a blow to us, because we were all so excited about this education, and then we were all heartbroken about the impact that that canal collapse had on our community and the water. And it opened our eyes to some other dilemmas that exist here, where there's multiple agencies that are managing the water, and while they all do a great job of managing that, the communication between them is maybe not so great. And the fact that that canal breach impacted the Gearing-Fort Laramie, as well as the Goshen irrigation districts, two different irrigation districts overseeing the same canal, and how they work together through that, really made us recognize that there's opportunity to help them to get the money to fix that, because it impacted a lot of people. So it was good to see how we could quickly change direction, get some key players involved. A lot of people on our team have some great connections, and that made it really easy for us to make that transition and get some people involved that could help us make some change. So really overall, it's been a great learning experience for me to learn about the differing priorities and how they have to be balanced when it comes to water use, and really how much opportunity there is to educate not just non-ag users, but honestly ag users. There's a lot of farmers who, with that canal, there's a lot of people who get water from that ditch that didn't even realize that that water went through a canal before it got to them. So a lot of opportunity for education, and I think we'll still continue that even beyond the scope of this project, and them studying our behaviors together. I can see us, I can see many people on the leadership team continuing their efforts.
Great. Thanks a lot, Janeene. I really appreciate that. And thanks for joining us. So Jesse, I hope we've saved a little bit of time for some Q&A, and I'll turn it over to you to guide us through the Q&A.
Well, thank you, Mark, and thanks Janine and Jason and Jessica and Wes for that introduction. I've heard myself a lot about the project over the last 2 years, so it was really nice actually to kind of get on the inside and get that perspective from the people putting it together, and then really the nucleus on the different leadership teams. Yeah, we have, we're scheduled to go till about 4:15. I thank everybody for hanging in and continuing to be dialed in here. And I'd love to have folks ask some questions of this group. Please go ahead and just type them into the chat box if you would. And we'll have Kelsey read those when they come in. And if people for some reason have keyboard issues, you can unmute yourself if that's just easier to do.
Well, while we're waiting, I'll just jump on what Jason said. When we couldn't identify a topic, and from the list or from the interviewees interviews, you know, we kind of had hope that there would be, so we had to kind of regroup a little bit, and we were also aware that, you know, if we it was a very important pivotal time in our local leadership team. If we couldn't identify a topic, well, then we were kind of dead in the water. So we thank him for hanging in there.
Thanks, Mark. Kelsey, did you get the question from Keith? I'll go ahead and read that out. So he asked if using local involvement to identify mutual issues of interest, Phragmites, how important is it to reevaluate the members for that specific question of interest? Mark, that might be a good one for you.
Yeah, or Wes, you can jump in too if you want. But well, I think, you know, I think in our case it was critical that that we had to, you know, our entire premise was to be a community identified and community led program. Of course, on our end, we were trying to learn more about what changes a consequence of community led, but on the local leadership team perspective, it was, you know, an opportunity that they don't often get to engage in and tackle an issue that isn't, that they get to choose. So I think it's very important. And yeah, I think in our interviews after this is all over is we'll reevaluate, you know, were they satisfied with the topic and how we approached it, and where we started and how we got there and the whole process. So I think those post local leadership team interviews are going to be critical on, you know, reevaluating the process and in everything from, you know, did we have the right players there? Did we, you know, should we have invited more people? Then, you know, everything's open for reevaluation. So thanks, Keith.
Okay, we have a question to everyone from Martha Rhodes. How were stakeholders recruited?
I can give a little snapshot of that, respond to that first question too. We thought it was interesting that once the groups converged around an issue, we're parallel tracking the extent to which a shared understanding or a shared vision emerges for the group of participants, and the degree to which diverse perspectives are allowed to be weighed by others, but whether a group is able to set aside differences and kind of identify a shared space to play in. And so if you take the Central Platte as an example with Phragmites and river conveyance, that once a group forms around a topic, it then becomes important to reevaluate or reopen discussion of what's the range of stakeholder perceptions on this issue. We may think about the scientific and technical biological approaches to management of phragmites, and whether that particular approach should be vetted again with a broader range of stakeholders, either through direct contact with the group or through some other surveys or some outreach. In other words, is there a diversity of perspectives on phragmite management that building discussion around could lead to improved management practices? To the general question of stakeholder identification, that's a fantastic question. And there's a fantastic growing body of literature on how to do this right. So we started with that literature, particularly some work by Rebecca Colvin's work. She publishes in Society and Natural Resources and other social science and interdisciplinary journals like that. And what we did is who's the key contacts in each of the project sites, and at UNL and at Penn State, we're both land grant institutions, and so we partnered with Extension. Clearly there's folks on our teams here with Extension appointments. So no, they're professional and personal networks. We also, again, drawing on that research, charted out what's the range of stakeholder groups and types, individuals and collectives that are active in this area, and who might be some folks there that we should think about asking if they want to be part of this process. The second step is we then went and met with all these folks on their farms, in their tractors, at their houses, at coffee shops, at UNL, at professional conferences, at their places of work, and invited them to share their range of perspectives on both the issues at stake in the place and their views on collaboration. And then from that, we kind of made sense of, is this somebody that would benefit from or could benefit being directly a part of this stakeholder engagement process? We then wrote them letters and called them and invited a broad swath of these folks to come to introductory meetings about this. And eventually it coalesced down to the folks that stayed on. There was more to the story than that, but that should give an overview.
Okay, we have another question. Martha says, thank you, by the way. W. Don Nelson wants to know, were you able to discover why, when the tunnel was originally constructed, the business model did not include, as part of the delivery charge, an ongoing assessment for the inevitable replacement or repair of the infrastructure?
So Don, so that's a great question. So you have to remember that these tunnels were built by the Bureau of Reclamation at the turn of the century. And farmers actually pay essentially a tax called an operating and maintenance fee, from which the individual irrigation districts, which are made up of boards of farmers, are for the repair and the maintenance of these tunnels. The Bureau of Reclamation technically owns these tunnels, and that's one of the challenges that we face, is who's responsible for tunnel failure, essentially. And so as we think about that, the question of replacement falls into that gray area. Who's responsible for replacing these tunnels should they need to be replaced? And so that's a question ultimately basically for the courts to decide if it ever goes that far. They are conducting repairs to that tunnel, but there's a question of who ultimately will foot the bill for those repairs. Does that accurately answer your question?
Are the irrigation district members asking for a refund of the money that they paid for maintenance?
Oh, I think if you gave them the chance, they would. But no, at this point, there are several things that are happening. So first of all, we're working with our federal and our state partners to identify sources of funding for the repair and maintenance. But at this point, like I said, there isn't much movement in terms of who's going to pay for what. You will notice that the Nebraska legislature I believe will be passing or has passed a bill that will include some funding for the repairs that have been completed to assist with that. And the other hard part is that this tunnel lays in Wyoming, not in Nebraska. And so the question also becomes, can we transfer Nebraska state dollars across state lines? And that opens up a whole nother can of worms related to the funding issue for repairs.
Thank you, Jessica. Well, it looks like that wraps up the questions. I'm just going to mention before Jesse wraps things up, if anyone is interested in receiving a certificate of participation for today's conference, please send me an email to watercenterinfo@unl.edu, and I will send out a certificate along with the agenda and the bios for the speakers so that you can submit that for your hours that you are requesting. As of right now, the UNL emails are down, and we do not know when they are going to be back up and working correctly. So that's why sending it to the Water Center info might be a little easier. So, thank you.
And I'd point out that Wes posted our project website in the chat.
Oh, okay. And also, Weston Eaton has posted their project website if anyone is interested. It's water, 4ag .p as in Papa, S as in Sam, U.edu.
Great, thank you, Trish.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Trish, and thanks to everybody, all the presenters and all the participants. Really appreciate it. Honestly, on a personal level, it's really nice to see people's faces, even if it is virtually, and have some information exchange. And the Q&A is also, I think, a much needed dialogue that we can have with people in these kind of socially distant times. We'll also be sharing out the video recording of this session, both sessions, through an email directly to the participants, but also do check on watercenter.unl.edu in the coming days for some of that content as well. I think with that, we're a little bit over time, but not egregiously so. So I wish everybody a nice afternoon, and we'll hopefully talk to many of you soon. So thank you.
Thanks, Jesse and the Water Center. Appreciate it.